The Miami Hurricanes hadn't beaten Florida State since 2020. 3 straight L's for the Hurricanes, but they got it done last night, and Damien Martinez absolutely took over.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Victory Sunday. I'm Alex Nano, University of Miami alumnus, longtime South Florida sports radio vet, co-host of Locked On ACC. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this episode, we will talk about what Miami's going to need to tweak before they take on Manny Diaz's Duke Blue Devils at home next week. That's been announced as a noon kickoff. But before we get to that, we have to dissect a victory against the Florida State Seminoles. We'll talk about the good and the bad. We'll talk about how Miami's offense was forced to adapt in this game and our top takeaways from that 36-14 win against Florida State. And, you know, for those who placed your wagers on FanDuel, Miami did cover. They did cover the 3 touchdown spread when it was all said and done. And, you know, one of the things that I get a little bit amused and I get a little frustrated sometimes when I see the way that even Miami fans start breaking down that win last night on social media. Like, don't forget it's a rivalry game. Don't forget. And, you know, maybe you're new to the story here. You've only watched a handful of these over the years. I've watched darn near 40 Miami versus Florida State games. A lot of weird stuff has happened in these series over the years. I will not apologize for a win in any way, shape, or form, especially not a 22-point win. Miami physically dominated the Florida State Seminoles in that game. The game was never close. Now, was it the type of blowout or obliteration that some of you and some of us had talked ourselves into? Like, hey, maybe we'll beat them 63-3 like Georgia did. Maybe we'll beat them 64-3. Maybe Cam Ward is going to throw for 5 touchdowns and completely embarrass them. That didn't happen. And we'll talk about the reasons why that didn't happen, why it wasn't, you know, a complete obliteration or anything like that. But, you know, I saw a few weirdos, negative Nancy Miami fans on social media last night, including an alleged Miami Hurricanes fan on X who said that the Hurricanes, keep in mind they had just won the game by 22 points against Florida State. He said the Hurricanes should be embarrassed by their performance. Embarrassed was the word that he used. No, you, sir, should be embarrassed to call yourself a Hurricanes fan. It's a rivalry. Yes, over the years, there's obviously been some blowouts here and there in this series. Florida State blew out Miami 2 years ago at Hard Rock Stadium. 2 years prior to that, Miami blew out Florida State in 2020. But the hallmark of this rivalry is to expect the unexpected. You throw the records out. Yes, Florida State entered the game 1-6 yesterday. Miami entered the game 7-0. Guess what? Miami leaves the stadium 8-0. Florida State leaves the stadium 1-7. Not a very good season for Mike Norvell and company. The Seminoles had a clear game plan to cut Miami's deep passing plays, to bracket Xavier Restrepo, for example, and they did a good job. I give Florida State, I give them so much credit because year after year, they do a really good job against X. They held Restrepo to 4 catches for 24 yards. And, you know, yes, despite how terrible their team has been this year, the Seminoles have a good defense and they accomplish some of their objectives out there. But since Miami is a good football team with a great offense, the Hurricanes were able to adapt. They were able to take what the defense gave them, and they were able to establish a dominant ground attack. Now, I want to talk about some of the notables that come out of this rivalry win for Miami. It's always nice to beat Florida State, and Miami remains ahead in the all-time series against the Seminoles, of course. But in winning this game now, the Hurricanes are champions of Florida. victories against the Seminoles and Gators in the same season for the first time since 2004. 20 years, first time in 20 years, Miami can claim the Florida championship. Hurricanes, of course, also threw in a victory against USF this year. They beat FAMU for what that's worth. So Miami wins the Florida championship for the first time in a long time. Hurricanes are 8-0 for the first time since 2017. And this is something our guy, Malik Rozier, former Miami Hurricanes starting quarterback, who remember he beat Florida State in dramatic fashion back in 2017. He reminded us of this when we spoke to him on our Friday episode, that Miami has now, with this victory, they've officially knocked the Seminoles out of bowl eligibility. Miami has ensured a losing season for Mike Norvell. It's going to be his third losing season in 5 years at FSU. Kudos to his agent for linking him to that Alabama job last offseason, getting him that big raise, $10 million per year. He's too expensive to fire. So, Norvell he may end up going 1-11 this season. He's going to have to fire his entire assistant coaching staff, but they cannot afford to fire him. And you know what? I hope they give him a lifetime contract. I would love to see Mike Norvell stay in charge for a very, very long time. On the Miami side of it, shout out to our Locked On Canes insider, BP, for reminding me of this. The Hurricanes, and I know, again, 8 wins is not the goal. 8 wins is not where we expect this team to finish. We're hoping for 12-0. We're hoping for an ACC championship, a college football playoff berth, all of that stuff. But if you zoom out, sit back and have a little perspective, it's not even Halloween yet, and the Hurricanes have their 8th win of the season. They won 7 games all of last year. And now with 4 games remaining on the regular season schedule, Miami has already reached 8. So you see the incremental improvements. Very rough first year in charge for Cristobal, the 5-7 season of 2022. Got a little bit better in 23 with the 7-5 record, which obviously should have been better than it was, but it was what it was. And now Miami already is at the very worst 8-4, but I do not expect them to lose out, of course. So we have to appreciate the progress. And yes, folks, the headliner for Miami's win, because again, there were imperfections in this game. We know that, right? And I'm sure Mario Cristobal probably is a little relieved. Like, we got another victory where I get teachable moments out of it, and I get to teach my guys lessons after a victory rather than after a loss. But what did work for the Hurricanes was, for the second straight week, Miami's running game breaks out. And folks, do not think it's a coincidence that the second straight game that Jalen Rivers, Miami's starting left tackle, has returned to the lineup. He was injured for most of the early part of the year. Second straight game for Jalen Rivers. Second straight game, Miami establishes dominance on the ground. So I give Jalen Rivers a lot of credit, but boy, I give Damien Martinez a lot of credit. That's Oregon State Damien Martinez. That's the guy that I saw on film when I found out he was on Miami's radar, back winter, what was it, or spring, I guess it was last year, before he arrived in the transfer portal, and I started studying Damien Martinez. That's the guy I was expecting here, and that's the guy we've gotten for the past couple of weeks. So, yeah, Florida State was able to basically completely cut Miami's explosive passing plays from this game. Miami's longest completion in the game was 21 yards, which is very uncharacteristic. But the Hurricanes needed the running game to step up, and they did. 148 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns from Damien Martinez. He averaged 9.9 yards per carry. And it's not as if he, broke out some 90-yarder that brought up the average. This man was pounding the FSU defense repeatedly. 9.9 yards per carry. He's been running angry. He's been leaving a trail of bodies behind. I don't know if a spark was lit under Martinez, the past couple weeks, where he is, he's been quote unquote demoted, where he still plays plenty, of course, but he's no longer technically the starting running back. Fletcher has been getting the starts, and Martinez has been running more decisively, no more of the dancing around, indecision like he had early in the season. He seems to be completely in mental control of Miami's blocking scheme and Miami's offense. And now Martinez has looked great. And of course, it wasn't just Martinez. Mark Fletcher added 71 yards and a touchdown on 15 carries. And I can only imagine what type of emotion Fletcher was running with on Saturday. You guys who are everydayers on Locked On Canes, big Miami fans, you probably heard this, and I can't get over. I can't even imagine how Mark Fletcher Jr. has been feeling this week. He lost his father just a few days ago. Mark Fletcher Sr. passed away, and I have been thinking of, and I have been praying for the Fletcher family, and I got a little emotional on that opening drive when he scores the touchdown to put Miami up 7-0, because there was not a player on that field who deserved to get into the end zone more than Fletch. And he put on a performance that would make his father proud. And I know Mark Fletcher Sr., who I've had a chance to meet before, just such a pleasant, positive human being. I had a chance to give him a hug, to talk a little ball with him. I know Fletcher Sr. he's watching his son up in heaven, and he's cheering for Fletch the same way he ever would. So God bless Mark Fletcher and the Fletcher family. I was so glad he scored a touchdown. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about what didn't go right for the passing game, because obviously, we've grown accustomed to, how many touchdown passes does Cam Ward have this week? 3, 4, 5? Is he over 400 yards this week? We didn't have that explosive game. Meanwhile, Miami's defense was a mixed bag. You had some bad. You also had some very good. So we will talk about it. We'll talk about notable stats that came out of this game. And let's remember, Miami has that 1-0 mentality. They just went 1-0 this week, beating the Florida State Seminoles. Going to try to go 1-0 next week when Manny Diaz returns to Hard Rock Stadium. My friends, we are only getting started. I'm telling you, you want to keep it locked right here on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Oh, and I already know you're keeping it locked to FanDuel. And yes, again, the type of performance that left some Miami fans wanting more. You left them wanting more last night. Hurricanes did manage to cover that spread when it was all said and done on FanDuel. Miami were 21-point favorites against Florida State. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with America's #1 sports book, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win right there on the FanDuel app. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more right on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. My friends, we are also proudly brought to you by Game Time. And I know you got the best deals on tickets for Miami against Florida State. It was sold out, but you were getting deals on tickets at the Game Time app. Game Time is the only ticket app that I use, and I love how the prices get lower the closer you get to the event. And Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams even easier. Game Time Picks filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Folks, I love the all-in pricing feature on Game Time. Shows you the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. I love getting a panoramic view from my seat right there in the app before I buy. And the Game Time lowest price guarantee means Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if you find tickets in the same section and row for less. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Thank you so much for making this game recap episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. By the way, Miami's going to get an Angry Duke next week, 12 noon. It's a 12 noon kickoff at Hard Rock Stadium. So I don't want to hear any excuses, right? Because in Miami, people act like a noon game is a 6 a.m. game. Or so. You have plenty of time to sleep in. Get your butts out to that stadium. Support your 8-0 team. If we can try to recreate the type of crowd that we had at Hard Rock Stadium last night, because that was fantastic. It was a legit sellout. Hard Rock was completely full. Vast majority were Miami fans. And yes, like Florida State always travels well to Miami, and they have a lot of alumni who live in the area. However, there are a few, it might only be 5% of the fan base, but there are a few Florida State fans who have enough shame that they stayed away from that game last night because their team is an embarrassment, okay? So it was mostly Miami fans, and it was an awesome sellout. We packed the Rock at Hard Rock Stadium yesterday. So hopefully we can have that same sort of energy against the Duke Blue Devils this coming week. So, all right, let's talk a little bit more about Miami's offense, because again, we did not have the characteristic Cam Ward picks apart defense. Of course, you do have to give credit to the opponent. I know Florida State is having a dreadful season this year, but they do have a lot of talent in the defensive backfield, and clearly a lot of talent on the defensive line. And unfortunately, that showed itself a lot in yesterday's game. And so Cam Ward, who is still a Heisman candidate, just so you know, he threw for a season low 208 yards, 0 touchdown passes. First time this year he's thrown for under 300 yards and hasn't thrown a touchdown pass, but he stayed interception free for the second straight game, threw the ball away when he needed to, didn't take too many chances because God forbid Miami committed a turnover in that game. Didn't need to take too many chances in a game when, you know, Miami was never really in danger. Like Miami was in control for the entire game. And Miami's actually, they did have one passing touchdown in the game, and it's going to be one for Ward's highlight reel. I'm calling the play the South Beach special. You had tight end Elijah Arroyo making a nice left-handed throw. I didn't realize he was a lefty till he threw that pass. He throws it to Cam Ward for a 7-yard touchdown. So Ward catches a receiving touchdown. That, you know, gave him the opportunity to do the signature Ward Selly after that play was over. And, you know, if we do, and we probably will, I don't know if he's going to win the Heisman Trophy, but we'll probably see Cam Ward in New York at the end of the season. And when they're showing his sizzle reel, that touchdown reception is going to be a play that's going to be prominently featured. And, you know, for those wondering, how do the Heisman Trophy odds look at this moment? So according to FanDuel, the Heisman odds right now, Dylan Gabriel, undefeated, top-ranked Oregon. Gabriel has now actually taken the lead at plus 230 in the Heisman race. Cam Ward and Ashton Genty, the running back from Boise State, are tied for second at plus 330. So Cam is still in the top 3, but he's no longer the Heisman favorite after yesterday. Maybe he'll go out there, he'll throw 6 bombs against Duke, and he'll get right back into the Heisman favorite race. All right, so talked a lot about, you know, what I did like about the game, and again, I do not take any rivalry win for granted. I mean, had Miami won the game by a point yesterday, I would still be relieved, and I would still have a smile on my face today, because that's just how Miami versus Florida State is. I would still be relieved about that. Miami won the game by 22 points, but we still have some things to complain about, because guess what? This is not a perfect football team. This is still a football team that's on the rise, trying to improve their fortunes. So what I didn't like about this game was, for as good as they were in run blocking, Miami's offensive line had a suspect game in pass protection. 4 sacks that were given up, you know, others that could have been given up, and we know Cam Ward can escape pretty well. Additional pressures that were surrendered. So this was not a banner performance when it comes to protecting your quarterback. They didn't protect Cam Ward well enough, okay? And that's something, when you talk about the pass protection, that needs to be tightened up quickly, because in 6 days, Miami's going to face an aggressive Duke defense next week. You know, we all know what the Manny Diaz trademark is. He loves to bring pressure. He loves to create TFL and sacks. So Miami's offensive line is going to need to be, you know, better in the pass protection standpoint next week. You know, overall, Miami's defense played far better than they had in the previous games. Like, they were in control of the game. But of course, as people are going to point out, Miami's defense went up against, you know, the worst scoring offense in the country. Florida State has not scored more than 21 points in a single game all year. And yeah, Miami had the worst play on defense. And this is really, you know, there wasn't much else wrong outside of this, but you had that defensive lapse that allowed Florida State quarterback Luke Kromenhoek to escape on fourth down to finish that 42-yard run. That was costly at the time because that led to the lone touchdown that FSU scored. That was the only time the game was close, when they cut Miami's lead to 14-7. And it was weird because he's like, finish your tackle. You had the guy bottled up behind the line of scrimmage. And our guy Herb says it was a fluke play. And hopefully it was, probably it was, but that was the most negative play on the defense. So the defense was not perfect, but it was a lot better. There was a lot more to like there. But again, Miami gets penalized too much. Some of that was the usual ACC BS, okay? Like, I'm still so angry about that phantom offensive pass interference call on Isaiah Horton. All the guy did was run his route. Like, it was unfathomable to me that they threw a flag on that play. And it's like, it's one of those things where, I don't know, Miami seems to be the only team in the ACC that consistently gets called for offensive pass interference and holding, because, I see Ruben Bain get held on every play and it never gets called. I see other teams, run picks and they never get called for offensive pass interference or offensive holding. It only happens to Miami, apparently. But and I can vent about the phantom call, but there were obviously some legitimate calls. The Tyler Barron roughing the passer, that was just dumb. You're about to get Florida State's offense off the field, and you get too aggressive, you lose your discipline, and it gives an automatic first down to the other team. Miami had 7 penalties in the game for 85 yards. Still too much. People have been asking me since last night, did Florida State's defense, did they set the blueprint for how to limit Miami's explosive plays? I mean, I guess maybe, but keep in mind, the type of talented defensive backs that FSU has is not something that most other teams can just duplicate. Like, a lot of other teams have tried to limit Xavier Restrepo. Like, typically, no matter how much attention an opposing defense plays to X, he still finds a way to be open on every play and get 100+ yards. But kudos to Florida State, because at 3 straight years, they've been able to limit Restrepo. They held him to 4 catches for 24 yards. I don't know if that's a blueprint that other teams can duplicate, but, keep in mind that even when Florida State was able to limit the explosive plays in Miami's passing game, the Hurricanes have a good enough, balanced enough offense. They were able to adapt and win another way. Because, Florida State had a lot of answers for Miami's passing game, didn't have very many answers for Miami's running game. And this is what I try to emphasize. And our guy Herb points out 230 rushing yards. 230 rushing yards. Miami's rushing attack has come alive earlier in the season. Miami, obviously they're so successful through the air. You fall in love with the passing game. Now, when you need the running game to step up, the running game has been stepping up for Miami. I appreciate it. Some notable stats from this game. So even in what a lot of us would consider an off day for Miami's offense, a quote-unquote off day, Hurricanes still manage in an off day to score 36 points. Florida State has barely scored half of 36 points in any game they played this season. Miami manages to pick up 31 first downs. That's a lot. They converted 8 of 14 third downs, a little over 57% for the day. So Miami remains right around 60% third down, top third down offense in the country. Miami went 3 for 3 on fourth down, by the way. Cristobal has gotten more aggressive with that this year. Florida State went for almost every fourth down they had. They went 4 for 7 there. Miami had a couple big stops, obviously. Hurricanes ran 76 total plays to Florida State's 60. FSU, by the way, they remain at the bottom of the country in forcing turnovers. Didn't force any turnovers last night. They only have 3 all season. So Miami was able to protect the football, thankfully. I don't want to forget about the kicker. Like, I do not want to finish this episode without giving props to Andy Borregales, because automatic Andy deserves it. Kickers are people too, guys. In the second and third quarters, Miami's offense kept stalling in the red zone. Like, Miami kept, moving the football or taking advantage of short fields, but they couldn't get into the end zone in the second and third quarter at times. I think they did score 1 second quarter touchdown, but there was a stretch second quarter into the third quarter where Miami couldn't punch it in, and Borregales goes 3 for 3. And he helps Miami extend their lead, which was huge before the offense. They returned to scoring touchdowns late in the game. They had a fourth quarter Damien Martinez rushing touchdown. You had the Elijah Arroyo pass to Cam Ward for a touchdown. So kudos to Andy Borregales. Big shout out to on Miami's defensive line, Akeem Mesidor, Simeon Barrow, and Ruben Bain all had a sack in the game. And by the way, Mario Cristobal, he was more fired up than usual talking to the media after this one. I was listening to Cristobal with Don Bailey Jr. on the radio broadcast, which I work on WQAM, and I was listening to Mario's post-game presser with the rest of the media. You could tell that, like, beating Florida State for the first time for him as head coach, that was like a weight lifted off of his shoulders. And Cristobal noted to any recruit, in-state or out of state, you see the trajectory that Miami's program is on, and you compare that to, he didn't name names, but I think we all know, he compared that to other teams within the state of Florida, the downward trajectories. You just beat one of those last night. You beat one of those week one in Gainesville. You compare their trajectories to Miami's trajectories, and I know recruits are taking notice. And by the way, first thing that I did when I got to the stadium yesterday afternoon, I got there very early. There were already some tailgaters out there, but I got there before like all the recruits started checking in. And I went over to the recruiting check-in table, and I asked one of the Miami staffers, like, hey, how many are you expecting today? Like, how many recruits are expected at the game? And I was expecting like, oh, maybe 60, 70 guys. I was told 150 recruits. 150 recruits is what they were expecting. I know one guy who apparently didn't make it to the game, unfortunately. He probably got an ultimatum from LSU where he's committed. DJ Pickett apparently did not make it to the game, but Ben Hanks, who's another top Miami defensive back target, committed to Florida, and literally about 149 other blue chippers made it out to the game. So that's something we're going to talk about more throughout the week. But guys, Mario Cristobal sent out a message to all the recruits out there. Make sure, folks, if you're watching this on YouTube, smash that thumbs up button. By the way, I still have my my media bracelet from checking in at Hard Rock Stadium yesterday. I'm never going to take this thing off. I will commemorate Miami's victory against Florida State. I'm going to rip it off tonight probably. But thank you guys so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. Hit that thumbs up button. If you're listening to the audio version, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Odyssey, wherever you get your pods. And we're going to talk to you guys again tomorrow on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.